You freeze mid-sentence. Everyone stares. Your authority vanishes. What if one word could have saved you? Leaders aren't born, they're decoded. 3 linguistic patterns separate influencers from invisibles. Why do some voices command instant respect while others beg for attention? The gap isn't charisma. It's syntax. Can you make strangers lean forward without raising your voice? Do people interrupt you or wait, captivated, for your next word? The answer lives in micro-movements of language most never notice. You will picture this moment. You're standing in front of the room. Your heart pounds. You've prepared for weeks. The presentation deck is flawless. Your data is bulletproof. You open your mouth and the first words that come out are, I just wanted to maybe share some thoughts if that's okay. In that instant, you've lost them. Not because your ideas are weak, not because you lack expertise, but because your language betrayed you before your second sentence finished. The VP in the back is already checking her phone. The colleague who challenged you last week is smiling, and you feel it. That sickening realization that you're fighting uphill for attention you should command by right. Now imagine a different version. Same room, same stakes. But this time you walk to the front, pause, make eye contact with 3 people in different parts of the room and say, "We're leaving money on the table. 3 decisions in the next 30 minutes will determine whether we capture it or watch our competitors take it." Let's start with the first. No hedging. No permission seeking. No verbal tics. The VP looks up. The challenger sits forward. You have the room, and more importantly, you know how to keep it. The difference between these 2 moments isn't confidence, though that's what most people assume. It's not even preparation. The difference is linguistic precision. The architecture of power lives in your sentences. The specific words you choose, the order you place them in, the moments you pause and the moments you accelerate. All of these microscopic choices add up to a macro impression that's almost impossible to fake and even harder to ignore once you understand how it works. Think about the last meeting you attended. Who held the room? Chances are it wasn't the most senior person, though seniority helps. It wasn't necessarily the loudest voice, though volume matters. It was the person whose language created a gravitational field. When they spoke, side conversations died. When they paused, no one jumped in. When they finished, their words lingered. They commanded the room, and here's the part that might surprise you. They probably weren't aware of most of the linguistic moves they were making. Natural leaders have internalized these patterns. They've learned them through repetition, observation, and correction, often unconsciously over years or decades. You're about to learn them consciously in the time it takes to finish this audiobook. I'm going to make you a promise that might sound impossible right now. By the time we're done, you'll be able to walk into any conversation, any meeting, any presentation, and within your first 10 seconds, establish an authority that most people spend careers trying to build. You'll know exactly which words to cut and which to emphasize. You'll understand why some sentence structures make people lean in while others make them tune out. You'll be able to handle interruptions, deflect attacks, and redirect conversations without ever raising your voice or losing your composure. And perhaps most importantly, you'll stop giving away your power through 1,000 tiny linguistic surrenders you're making right now without realizing it. But first, we need to run a diagnostic. Before we can fix the problem, you need to see it clearly. Most people have no idea how their language undermines them because they're so focused on what they're saying that they never analyze how they're saying it. Content matters, obviously. But delivery determines whether your content lands or dies in the air between you and your audience. So let's start by identifying the 5 invisible patterns that are killing your credibility right now, before you finish your next sentence. The first pattern I call the apologizer's trap. Listen to how people begin sentences in professional settings. Actually, listen to how you begin sentences. How often do you hear or say phrases like, "I just think maybe we could," or "This might be a stupid question, but," or "I'm not sure if this is right, but." These hedges feel polite. They feel collaborative. They feel like you're making space for other perspectives. And on the surface, that sounds like good leadership. But here's what's actually happening. Every qualifier you add is a brick in the wall between you and authority. When you say "I think," instead of stating your position, you're inviting debate before you've even made your case. When you say "maybe," you're undermining your own certainty. When you say "just," you're minimizing your contribution before anyone else gets the chance. Try this experiment. For the next 24 hours, pay attention to every time you use one of these words in professional communication. I think, maybe, perhaps, possibly, just kind of, sort of, probably, potentially, might, could, should. If you're like most people, you'll be horrified at the frequency. These words are everywhere in your speech, and each one is a tiny surrender of authority. Now, I'm not suggesting you eliminate all nuance from your communication. There are moments when uncertainty is appropriate, when collaboration requires softening your stance, when you genuinely don't know and need to signal that. But for most professionals, the ratio is catastrophically wrong. They hedge when they should declare. They soften when they should stake a claim. They turn statements into questions and convictions into possibilities. The second pattern is what I call the rambler's curse. This one is brutal because it feels productive. You're giving context. You're being thorough. You're making sure everyone understands the full picture. But what's actually happening is that you're burying your point under so many words that by the time you get to it, people have stopped listening. Length is not depth. More words do not equal more insight. In fact, the inverse is often true. The ability to distill a complex idea into a single clear sentence is one of the most powerful authority signals you can send. It tells people you've done the thinking, you've processed the complexity, and now you're giving them the output, not making them wade through your input. Here's how to test whether you're a rambler. Record yourself explaining something you know well to a colleague or friend. Then listen back and count how many sentences it takes you to get to your actual point. If the answer is more than 3, you're rambling. If you're providing background before your thesis, you're rambling. If you're explaining why you're about to say something before you say it, you're rambling. Every sentence before your main point is a tax on your listener's attention, and attention is finite. By the time you get to the important part, they've already decided whether you're worth listening to. If you've spent your opening rambling, they've decided you're not. The third pattern is the approval seeker's tell. This one shows up in your vocal inflection more than your word choice, though it affects both. It's called upspeak, that tendency to raise your pitch at the end of sentences, turning statements into questions. It sounds like this, so we should probably move forward with the Johnson proposal. Notice that question mark. It shouldn't be there. You're not asking. You're telling. But your voice betrayed your uncertainty, or worse, your need for approval before you commit. Upspeak is linguistic permission seeking. It's asking your listener to validate you before you'll stand behind your own words. And the cruel irony is that by seeking approval, you make it less likely you'll receive it. Authority doesn't ask for permission. It states and moves forward. Tag questions are the verbal version of upspeak. These are the little phrases people tack onto the end of statements. That makes sense, right? Or we should do this, don't you think? Or this is the best approach, wouldn't you agree? Each one of these transforms your declaration into a request for validation. You're literally asking your listener to do the work of supporting your position. And while that might feel collaborative, what it actually does is signal that you don't trust your own judgment enough to let it stand without endorsement. People follow leaders who stake claims, not leaders who constantly check whether their claims are acceptable. The fourth pattern is silence used as a wound instead of a weapon. Most people are terrified of silence. They treat every pause like a problem to be solved with more words. Someone stops talking and they rush to fill the void. They finish their point, and before it can land, they're already onto the next one, or worse, they're apologizing for the one they just made. But silence is one of the most powerful tools in your linguistic arsenal. When used strategically, a pause can emphasize a point more effectively than any word. It can make people uncomfortable in a way that compels them to reveal their positions. It can signal that you're done talking, and it's time for them to respond, or for the group to act. But you have to be comfortable with the discomfort. You have to let the silence sit there without rescuing everyone from it. Think about the last time someone said something in a meeting and then just stopped. No follow-up, no elaboration, no nervous laughter, just a statement hanging in the air. What happened? Probably someone else spoke up to address it, to agree, to challenge, to do something with that space. The person who created the silence controlled what happened next without saying another word. That's the weapon version of silence. The wound version is when you trail off, when your voice gets quieter at the end of sentences, when you fill every pause with or so or yeah, because you can't bear the void. Every time you do that, you're telling your listener that your words don't deserve space, that your thoughts aren't complete enough to stand alone, that you need their rescue. The fifth pattern is the hardest one to see in yourself because it's not about what you say, but about how you physically inhabit your communication. It's the mismatch between your words and your body, between your content and your presence. You can say all the right things, eliminate every hedge, cut your rambling, flatten your upspeak, master your silence, and still undermine yourself if your physical presence contradicts your verbal message. This shows up in 1,000 small ways. The way you hold eye contact or don't. The way you stand or sit. Whether you make yourself bigger or smaller in the space. Whether your hands are visible and purposeful or hidden and fidgeting. Whether your face is animated and engaged or frozen and distant. Here's the thing about physical presence. Your body communicates faster than your words. Before your first sentence finishes, people have already formed an impression based on how you showed up. If your body says, "I'm not sure I belong here," but your words say, "Here's what we're doing," the body wins. Always. You can't verbally convince someone to take you seriously if your physical presence is apologizing for existing. And the brutal truth is that most people's bodies are betraying them constantly. They're shrinking when they should expand. They're looking down when they should hold a gaze. They're putting barriers between themselves and their audience, literally crossing their arms or hiding behind furniture or creating distance that reads as either fear or disrespect. Now, you might be wondering how bad your own situation is. You might be thinking, surely I don't do all of these things. Maybe you're right. Maybe you've mastered one or two of these areas already. But I challenge you to actually find out rather than assume. Here's your first exercise, and it's going to be uncomfortable. Take out your phone, hit record, and speak for 2 minutes about something you know well, something you'd potentially present at work or explain to someone who needed your expertise. Don't script it. Just talk the way you would in a real conversation or meeting. Then listen back. Don't just listen to what you said. Listen to how you said it. Count the hedges. Notice where you rambled. Catch the upspeak. Feel the uncomfortable silences you filled. Watch your body if you recorded video. Be honest about what you see and hear. Most people have never done this. They've gone their entire careers without actually examining their linguistic patterns. They wonder why they're not landing the impact they want, why they're getting interrupted, why people don't seem to take them seriously, but they never run the diagnostic. They never look under the hood. You're ahead of the game just by being here, by being willing to examine this. But awareness alone won't fix it. You need to rebuild the patterns. You need to rewire your linguistic operating system at the sentence level. Let's talk about syntax. I know that word probably triggers memories of English class and grammar rules that felt arbitrary. But syntax isn't about correctness. It's about power. The way you structure your sentences determines whether they command attention or beg for it. And the single most important syntactical move you can make is simple. Put your subject first and use active voice. This sounds basic, and it is. But basic doesn't mean easy, and it definitely doesn't mean common. Most professional communication is drowning in passive construction and buried subjects. Listen to the difference between these two sentences. A decision needs to be made about the budget versus I'm deciding the budget. Same information. Radically different authority signal. The first sentence is passive. No one is responsible. The decision just needs to be made by some unnamed force. The second sentence is active. There's a clear subject, I, and a clear action, deciding. Even if you changed I to we or the board or any other subject, the active construction creates clarity and accountability. Now, you might be thinking, but sometimes I don't want to be that direct. Sometimes I need to soften things, and that might be true in rare cases. But examine your ratio. If more than 10% of your sentences are passive, you're hiding. You're diffusing responsibility. You're making it harder for people to know who's doing what, and that ambiguity kills authority. Leaders make subjects clear and actions concrete. They say who is doing what, and they do it in as few words as possible. Here's another syntactical pattern that will transform your communication. End your sentences with periods, not question marks, unless you're actually asking a question. This sounds absurd to even say out loud, but watch how often people violate it. They make a statement, but their voice rises at the end, creating that upspeak we talked about earlier. Verbally, they're adding a question mark where a period belongs, or they literally add tag questions. We should move forward, shouldn't we? That's a period masquerading as a question. You've already made your point. Don't unmake it by seeking validation. State your position and stop. Let the period do its work. Silence after a statement is powerful. Silence after a question you didn't mean to ask is just confusion. The third syntactical move is about what I call the certainty cascade. This is when you stack confident statements in a row, building momentum with each one. No hedges, no questions. Just declaration after declaration. It sounds like this. The data is clear. Our current approach isn't working. We need to pivot. The new strategy launches Monday. Each sentence is short. Each one is definitive. Each one propels you into the next. There's no room for interruption because you're not leaving gaps. There's no room for doubt because you're not introducing any. This doesn't mean you're being rigid or refusing to hear other perspectives. It means you're making your position unambiguous before you open the floor. You're establishing the baseline from a position of strength, not negotiating your way into having a viewpoint. Now let's talk about the words you need to eliminate. I mentioned some of these earlier, but it's worth going deeper because these words are poison, and you're probably using them constantly without realizing it. First on the execution list is just, as in, I just wanted to follow up, or I'm just checking in, or this is just a quick thought. Every time you use just in this context, you're diminishing what follows. You're making it smaller, less important, less worthy of attention. You think you're being polite or humble. You're actually training people to take you less seriously. Try removing just from your vocabulary for a week and notice what happens. Your requests become requests, not apologies. Your ideas become ideas, not minor suggestions that can be easily dismissed. Next is I think, when you actually know. If you've done the analysis, if you have the data, if this is your area of expertise, don't hide behind I think. Say what you know. I think we should increase the marketing budget is weaker than we should increase the marketing budget in every context. The phrase I think adds no information. Everyone knows these are your thoughts since you're the one saying them. What it does add is doubt. It positions your statement as opinion rather than informed conclusion. Now, there are moments when I think is appropriate. When you're genuinely offering a perspective that's uncertain, when you're in someone else's domain and want to signal you're not claiming authority, when you're trying to model intellectual humility, but those moments are rare. Most of the time, I think is a reflexive hedge, not a strategic choice. Maybe is another one. Maybe we should consider this approach. What exactly does maybe add? It makes your suggestion provisional before anyone has even heard it fully. It's preemptive retreat. If you believe in the approach, advocate for it. If you don't bring it up. But don't split the difference with maybe, because all you're doing is signaling that you're not sure your own idea deserves airtime. The same goes for perhaps and possibly, and all the other words that turn declarations into tentative offerings. Cut them. Make the statement. If you're wrong, you can adjust. But you can't lead from a posture of constant uncertainty. Here's a harder one to eliminate because it feels so natural in conversation. The word so at the beginning of sentences. So, I was thinking we could try this. So, here's what happened. So let me explain. That so is a filler. It's a verbal throat clearing. It's the linguistic equivalent of saying but slightly more disguised. It adds nothing except hesitation. Start your sentences with the actual content. I was thinking we could try this. Here's what happened. Let me explain. Feel how much stronger those are? The word so creates a little speed bump, a tiny moment where you're warming up instead of delivering. Get rid of the warm-up. Start strong. And finally, let's talk about sorry when you haven't done anything wrong. Sorry, can I ask a question? Sorry, do you have a minute? Sorry, I need to interrupt. None of these require an apology. You're asking a question in a meeting. That's what meetings are for. You need someone's time. That's how work happens. You have to interrupt a conversation. That's sometimes necessary. But by apologizing, you're framing your completely legitimate needs as impositions. You're asking permission to take up space. Leaders don't apologize for existing. They respect others' time. They're considerate of context, but they don't start every interaction with an apology for having needs or perspectives. Save sorry for when you've actually caused harm or made a mistake. Use it strategically, and it's powerful. Use it constantly, and it's just another way you're giving away your authority before you've even made your point. Once you've started cleaning up your syntax and eliminating the power-draining words, the next layer is vocal control. Your voice is an instrument, and most people are playing it with about 10% of its range. They're stuck in a narrow band of pitch, pace, and volume because they've never thought about how these variables affect perception. But your vocal choices matter enormously. Two people can say the exact same sentence with the same words in the same order, and one will sound authoritative while the other sounds uncertain, entirely because of vocal mechanics. Let's start with pitch, specifically the direction your pitch moves at the end of sentences. We touched on upspeak earlier, but it's worth emphasizing because this is one of the fastest ways to undermine yourself. When your pitch rises at the end of a statement, you're turning it into a question, even if the words themselves are declarative. This is especially common in younger professionals, and particularly in women, though men do it too. It's often unconscious, a learned pattern of seeking approval or trying to seem non-threatening. But the effect is devastating. Every statement becomes a request for permission. Every fact becomes provisional. Your listener hears uncertainty, and uncertainty is kryptonite to authority. The fix is simple but requires conscious effort until it becomes habit. Practice downward inflection. Make your pitch drop at the end of statements. Record yourself reading a few sentences, focusing on bringing your voice down on the final words. It will feel weird at first. It might even feel aggressive if you're used to upspeak. But listen back. Notice how much more definitive you sound. Notice how the statement lands instead of floating. That downward movement signals completion, certainty, finality. It tells your listener, this is the information. I'm done delivering it. You don't need to validate it for it to be true. Now let's talk about pace. Most people speak at one speed, usually faster than they realize, especially when they're nervous. Rapid speech can signal anxiety, lack of control, or disrespect for your listener's processing time. On the flip side, consistently slow speech can come across as condescending or low energy. The key is variation. Strategic shifts in pace keep your listener engaged and allow you to emphasize what matters. When you want to underscore importance, slow down. Let each word land. Create space between your phrases. When you're moving through background information or transitional material, you can speed up slightly, but never stay at one pace for long. A monotonous delivery, even with perfect words and syntax, will lose your audience. Try this. Take a complex sentence, something with multiple clauses, and practice saying it with different pace patterns. Say the whole thing slowly, then say it all quickly. Then try varying, slow on the key point, faster on the supporting details. Listen to how the meaning shifts based not on what you say, but on how you time it. This is vocal architecture. You're building a structure for your listener to walk through, and the pace determines whether they're running, strolling, or pausing to take in the view. Volume is another lever most people don't use strategically. They find one volume level that feels comfortable and stay there. But volume is a tool for emphasis, for regaining attention, for creating intimacy, or commanding a room. You don't have to yell to use volume effectively. In fact, sometimes the most powerful move is to get quieter. When everyone expects you to raise your voice and you lower it instead, people lean in. They physically move closer. They stop side conversations. They focus. This is the whisper technique, and it only works if you've established that they need to listen to you in the first place. If you start quiet, you'll just be ignored. But if you've commanded attention and then you drop your volume, you create a compelling reason to stay focused. The inverse is also true. A sudden increase in volume, used sparingly, can jolt attention back to you. Not sustained loudness, which just fatigues your listener, but a strategic spike. One word, one phrase, delivered with more force than what surrounds it. This is the vocal equivalent of bold text. It tells your listener, this part matters more. Pay attention here. But like bold text, if you overuse it, it loses all power. You can't emphasize everything. You have to choose. And the choice of what to make louder and what to let sit at baseline volume is a strategic decision that shapes how your message is received. Perhaps the most underutilized vocal tool is the pause. We talked about silence earlier in the context of not filling every gap with words, but let's get specific about the mechanics. A strategic pause is not a hesitation. It's not an or a so or a throat clear. It's a deliberate gap, usually between 1 and 3 seconds, placed for effect. You can pause before a key point to build anticipation. You can pause after a key point to let it sink in. You can pause when someone challenges you, creating space to formulate a response instead of reacting immediately. You can pause after asking a question, actually waiting for an answer instead of filling the silence yourself. Most people are so uncomfortable with silence that they'll rush to fill it, even if filling it means undermining their own point. They make a strong statement, then immediately weaken it with, but maybe I'm wrong, or what do you think? Because the silence after their statement felt too vulnerable. But that silence is where your power lives. When you make a point and then stop, you force your listener to sit with it. They can't move on until they've processed what you said. They can't ignore it because you're not giving them anything else to focus on. The pause creates a container for your message. It says, this is important enough that we're going to let it breathe for a moment before we move forward. Breathing is the foundation under all of this. Most people breathe shallowly, especially when they're speaking, especially when they're nervous. Shallow breathing makes your voice thin. It makes you run out of air mid-sentence. It makes you rush because you're trying to get to a pause point where you can catch your breath. Deep breathing, specifically diaphragmatic breathing, gives you vocal power. It steadies your nerves. It allows you to sustain longer sentences without sounding winded. It gives you the physiological foundation to speak with authority. Practice breathing from your belly, not your chest. Feel your abdomen expand as you inhale. Practice speaking a sentence on a single breath, then extending it to 2 sentences, then 3. This isn't about showing off. It's about having the respiratory support to deliver your message without your body betraying you halfway through. Now let's talk about the most critical communication window you'll ever face. The first 10 seconds. Whether you're walking into a meeting, starting a presentation, meeting someone new, or jumping into a conversation, the first 10 seconds determine how everything that follows will be received. In that tiny window, people are making a massive number of judgments about you. Are you confident? Do you belong here? Should I listen to you? Are you a threat or an ally? Are you competent or out of your depth? These judgments are largely unconscious and based on factors that have nothing to do with the content of what you're about to say. They're based on how you enter the space, how you carry yourself, where you look, how you sound, what your face is doing. And here's the brutal part. Once those judgments are made, they're very hard to reverse. If you start weak, you'll spend the rest of the interaction trying to recover. If you start strong, you'll benefit from a halo effect where everything you say is interpreted generously. The first 10 seconds are not equal to the next 10 or the 10 after that. They're weighted. They're disproportionately important, so you need a system for nailing them every single time. This isn't about being inauthentic or putting on a performance. It's about being intentional with the signals you send, making sure that the first impression you create matches the authority you actually possess. Let's break down entry presence. Before you say a word, your body is communicating. If you're walking into a room for a meeting or presentation, how you physically enter matters. Are you rushing? Rushing signals either anxiety or lower status, like you're late and apologetic about taking people's time. Are you hesitating at the threshold? Hesitation signals uncertainty about whether you belong. The powerful entry is measured. You move at a pace that says you're exactly where you should be. Not fast, not slow. Deliberate. You're not rushing to get it over with, and you're not dragging it out. You're simply entering, with the confidence that this is your right and your space to command. Your eye contact in those first seconds needs to be purposeful. Not staring, which is aggressive. Not looking down, which is submissive. Not scanning frantically, which is nervous. Here's the pattern that works. As you enter and position yourself, make eye contact with 2 or 3 specific people in different parts of the room. Hold each gaze for just a moment, long enough to register that you've seen them. This does 2 things. First, it makes those individuals feel acknowledged, which creates micro-allies immediately. Second, it demonstrates that you're comfortable being seen, which signals confidence. If you're presenting to a large group, you obviously can't make individual eye contact with everyone, but you can use the same principle. Look at different sections of the room, pausing your gaze in each section long enough that people in that area feel included. Then comes your opening line. This is where most people fail catastrophically. They open with apologies, with filler, with rambling context. Sorry I'm late. Thanks for having me. So, I guess we should get started. I'm not sure if everyone got the memo, but every one of these openings is a disaster. You're starting from a position of weakness or uncertainty. You're asking permission to proceed. You're introducing doubt. Instead, your opening line should do one of 3 things. State a fact that establishes relevance. Ask a question that creates stakes. Or make a declaration that sets the frame. Let me give you examples. 3 companies in our sector failed last quarter. That's a fact that establishes relevance. Your listener immediately knows why they should care about what comes next. How much market share are we willing to lose before we act? That's a question that creates stakes. It implies consequences and demands a decision. We're making a change today that will determine our trajectory for the next 5 years. That's a declaration that sets the frame. It tells your listener this matters. This is significant. Pay attention. Notice what none of these openings include. No apologies, no filler, no permission seeking, no rambling wind-up. You start strong. You start with substance. You start with something that demands engagement. After your opening line, resist the urge to immediately explain it or soften it. Let it land. This is that strategic pause we talked about. You've made your opening statement. Now give it a beat. Let your listener process it. Let them feel the weight of it. Then, and only then, do you move into your next point. This pattern, strong opening plus pause plus build, is a power move. It demonstrates control. It shows you're not afraid of silence. It proves you believe your words deserve space. Your facial expression during these first 10 seconds matters more than you probably realize. Most people, especially when nervous, have either a flat effect or a forced smile. Neither works. A flat effect reads as disengaged or hostile. A forced smile reads as nervous or inauthentic. What you want is open engagement. Your face should reflect that you're present, that you're interested in being here, that you have something worth sharing. This doesn't mean grinning like you're selling something. It means your face is alive, responsive, human. A natural, slight smile that reaches your eyes. Expression that changes slightly as you move through your opening. Animation that signals you're genuinely engaged, not performing a script. And here's something most people never think about. Your opening vocal tone. Are you starting strong or starting tentative? Are you using your full voice or a pinched higher version? Nerves often make people's voices go up in pitch and down in volume at the exact moment they need the opposite. Your opening sentence should be delivered in the lower resonant part of your vocal range. This signals calm confidence. It makes you sound authoritative, and it sets the vocal baseline for everything that follows. If you start high and quiet, you'll have to work to bring it down. If you start low and clear, you can vary from that strong foundation. Let's put this all together with a specific scenario. Imagine you're walking into a meeting where you need to propose a significant change. You know at least 2 people in the room are skeptical. You're not the most senior person present, but you have the expertise, you've done the work, and you need to command the room from the start. Here's what it looks like when you nail the first 10 seconds. You arrive exactly on time, not early and anxiously waiting, not late and apologetic. You walk in at a measured pace. You move to an open seat that gives you good sight lines, or if you're presenting, to the front of the room. As you walk, you make eye contact with the senior executive and nod slightly. You make eye contact with one of the skeptics and hold it for a moment. You set down your materials without fumbling. You stand or sit with your full height, not slumped, not rigid. You take a breath. Then you look up, scan the room once more and say, "We're spending 40% more per acquisition than our closest competitor." That gap is widening. You pause. 2 seconds of silence. Then you continue. "I'm going to show you why and what we're doing about it starting Monday." In that 10 seconds, you've done everything right. You entered with presence. You positioned yourself well. You made strategic eye contact. You opened with a fact that creates urgency. You paused to let it land. You made a declaration that establishes you're not just analyzing, but acting. You did all of this without a single filler word, without an apology, without asking permission. You commanded the room. And now, whatever you say next will be heard through the filter of that strong opening. That's the power of the first 10 seconds. Let's shift now to a problem that plagues almost everyone at some point. Getting interrupted. You're in the middle of making a point and someone cuts you off. Maybe they're impatient. Maybe they're testing you. Maybe they're just rude or don't realize they're doing it. Whatever the reason, how you handle interruptions determines whether you maintain authority or lose it. Most people respond in one of 2 ineffective ways. They either stop talking and defer, losing the floor entirely, or they try to talk louder and over the interrupter, turning the conversation into a volume contest. Neither works. Deferring makes you look weak. Talking louder makes you look defensive. There's a third way, and it's devastatingly effective. When someone interrupts you, the first move is to not stop immediately. Continue your sentence. Don't speed up, don't slow down, don't raise your volume. Just keep going as if the interruption is a minor audio glitch that doesn't concern you. This does 2 things. It signals that you're not done and don't intend to yield. And it often makes the interrupter stop because they realize they're creating an awkward overlap. Now, if they persist and keep talking, you've got a choice. You can pause, turn to them, and use what I call the redirect. The redirect is a brief acknowledgement that doesn't cede control. It sounds like this. You pause. You look at them. You say, "I'll get to that." Then you turn back to the broader group and continue. No aggression, no apology. Just a clear statement that you've heard them, you'll address it. But right now you're finishing your point. Another version of the redirect is the callback hold. This is when you reference what you were saying before the interruption, which subtly emphasizes that you were interrupted and are now returning to your rightful place, as I was saying before the question, or to finish the point I started. You're not directly calling out the interrupter, which would create unnecessary conflict. But you're making it clear that you were in the middle of something and you're reclaiming that space. This works because it reframes the interruption as a temporary pause, not a successful hijacking of the conversation. The most advanced move is what I call preemptive framing. This is when you sense an interruption coming and you block it before it happens. Maybe you see someone lean forward or open their mouth. You make eye contact with them and say, "Let me finish this thought. Then I want to hear from you." You've acknowledged them without yielding. You've promised them a turn, which makes them more willing to wait. And you've made it explicit that you're not done, which makes it socially awkward for them to interrupt anyway. This is high-level conversational control. You're managing not just what you say, but what others are about to do, guiding the rhythm of the exchange. Here's what you don't do. You don't say, "Can I just finish?" That's asking permission. You don't say, "You interrupted me," even if it's true. That's accusatory and will make people defensive. You don't sigh or show frustration, because that makes you look like you can't handle pushback. You stay calm, you stay focused, and you use language that's firm but not hostile. The goal is to reclaim the floor without creating enemies. You want people to respect your boundaries, not resent them. Now let's talk about how you use questions, because questions are one of the most misunderstood tools in communication. Most people think questions are inherently submissive, a way to gather information by putting yourself in a lower position. And yes, if you use questions poorly, that's exactly what they do. But if you use them strategically, questions are instruments of power. They allow you to guide conversations, expose weaknesses in arguments, and control what gets discussed without having to make every point yourself. The key is understanding the difference between genuine questions, rhetorical questions, and Socratic redirects. A genuine question is what it sounds like. You don't know something and you're asking to learn it. There's nothing wrong. Rhetorical questions are questions you're not asking for an answer. You're asking to make a point. Do we want to be the company that missed this opportunity? You're not waiting for someone to say yes or no. You're using the question structure to frame the stakes. Rhetorical questions can be powerful, but they're easy to overuse. If every other sentence is a rhetorical question, you start to sound like you're giving a motivational speech instead of having a conversation. Use them sparingly. Use them when you want to shift the emotional temperature of the room or when you want to make people reflect without telling them to. The Socratic redirect is the most sophisticated question technique. This is when someone asks you something, and instead of answering directly, you answer with a question that either exposes a flaw in their premise or shifts the conversation to more useful ground. Let's say someone asks, "Why should we invest in this when the ROI is unclear?" A weak response is defensive. "Well, I think the ROI is actually pretty clear if you look at the projections." A Socratic redirect sounds like, "What's our cost if we don't invest and our competitor does?" You're not defending. You're reframing. You're making them think about the question differently. And you're doing it in a way that doesn't look like avoidance because you're engaging, just on different terms. Here's a scenario to illustrate this. You're in a strategy meeting. Someone challenges your proposal. "This seems risky. What if it doesn't work?" You could defend it directly. You could list all the reasons you think it will work. But that positions you as having to prove something. Instead, try this. "You're right, there's risk. What's your threshold for acceptable risk on an initiative with this potential upside?" Now they have to define their terms. They have to explain what they mean by risky and what trade-offs they're willing to make. You've shifted the burden. You're no longer defending. You're collaboratively defining parameters. This is question mastery. You've taken their challenge and turned it into a conversation where you have equal or greater control. Another question technique is buying time without looking weak. Sometimes you get asked something and you don't have an immediate answer. Most people panic. They either make something up, which is dangerous, or they say, "I don't know," which is honest but costs you credibility if you do it too often. There's a middle path. You bridge. That's the right question. Let me think about the best way to frame the answer. Or, there are a few variables in that. Which aspect are you most concerned about? You're not saying you don't know. You're saying you're thinking, which is a strength, not a weakness. You're also narrowing the question, which often makes it easier to answer and shows you're thinking critically about what's really being asked. Now, let's talk about one of the most underrated communication skills, which is storytelling as a dominance tool. Most people think stories are for making points relatable or memorable, and that's true. But stories also establish authority in a way that straight argumentation doesn't. When you tell a story well, you control the narrative frame. You decide what information gets revealed and in what order. You create an emotional journey that makes your listener more receptive to your conclusion, and you position yourself as someone who has experience, who has been places and seen things, which is a subtle status signal. The structure of a powerful story is simple: hook, stake, payoff. The hook is the opening that grabs attention. It's usually a moment of conflict, surprise, or high stakes. Not backstory, not setup, the moment where something interesting is happening. I was standing in front of the board when the CEO said, "We're out of cash." That's a hook. You've started in the action. Your listener wants to know what happens next. The stake is the why this matters. What was at risk? What would happen if this went wrong? The board, the company, your career, something tangible. The payoff is the resolution and the lesson. How did it turn out, and what did you learn that's relevant to the current conversation? Here's what most people do wrong with stories. They start with too much context. So 3 years ago, I was working at this company, and we had this really interesting situation where the market was changing, and there were a lot of factors. By the time they get to the actual story, their listener has checked out. Start in the moment. You can add context later if it's needed, but lead with the action. The other mistake is making the story too long. A good professional story is 60 to 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes if it's particularly compelling. Longer than that and you're not storytelling, you're rambling. Every sentence should earn its place. If it doesn't move the story forward or deepen the stakes, cut it. The third mistake is weak sensory detail. Stories come alive when they're specific. Not "I was in a meeting," but "I was in the glass conference room on the 42nd floor." Not "someone disagreed with me," but the CFO crossed her arms and said, "That's not how we do things here." Specific details make stories real. They make them visual. They make your listener feel like they're there, which increases emotional engagement and makes your ultimate point land harder. But here's the balance. Details have to be relevant. Don't describe what everyone was wearing unless it matters. Don't give a full backstory on a character unless it's necessary. Specific, yes. Excessive, no. The protagonist positioning in your story matters. If you're always the hero, you'll come across as arrogant. If you're always the victim, you'll seem weak. The best positioning is usually as a protagonist who faced a real challenge, made decisions, learned something, and came out the other side wiser. You can be the hero sometimes, especially if the lesson is about decisive action, but you can also be the person who made a mistake and learned from it, which makes you relatable. Or the observer who saw something important happen and extracted a lesson. Vary your positioning based on what the story needs to teach. The lesson landing is the trickiest part. You've told your story. You've reached the resolution. Now you need to connect it to the current conversation. Most people do this clumsily. They over-explain. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's really similar to what we're facing now, and the lesson I learned was that we need to act quickly. That's too much. You've explained the moral like your listener is a child. Trust that if you've told the story well, the connection will be obvious. You can make it with a single sentence. That's why I'm advocating we move now. Or even just, same situation. Often you don't need to explicitly state the lesson at all. The story has made your point. Adding a heavy-handed moral undermines the elegance. Let's address one of the most difficult communication scenarios, which is disagreeing without retreating. You're in a conversation or meeting. Someone says something you think is wrong. How do you challenge it without coming across as combative, arrogant, or closed-minded? This is where most people fail. They either don't disagree at all, swallowing their position to avoid conflict, or they disagree so bluntly that they create unnecessary enemies. There's a middle path that allows you to be forceful in your disagreement while maintaining relationship and credibility. The first technique is what I call steel manning. This is the opposite of straw manning, where you misrepresent someone's argument to make it easier to attack. Steel manning is when you present the strongest possible version of their argument before you counter it. This does two things. It shows you've actually listened and understood, which makes the other person more receptive to your challenge. And it makes your counter-argument stronger because you're defeating their best case, not a weak caricature. It sounds like, "I think what you're saying is that we should prioritize short-term revenue even if it means sacrificing long-term positioning." That makes sense if we're facing a liquidity crisis, but here's where I disagree. You've acknowledged their logic. You've shown where it's valid. Now you're explaining why it's not sufficient. The second technique is data drops without lectures. If you disagree based on evidence, present the evidence concisely and let it speak. Not, "Well, actually, if you look at the research, there have been 17 studies on this topic, and the meta-analysis shows." That's insufferable. Instead, the meta-analysis on this is clear. 3 factors drive outcomes. We're ignoring 2 of them. You've cited evidence without being a pedant about it. You've established that your disagreement isn't just opinion, it's grounded. And you've done it in 2 sentences instead of 2 minutes. Tone calibration is critical here. There's a difference between firm and hostile. Firm is, I disagree with that approach. Hostile is, that's a terrible idea. Both convey disagreement, but one invites discussion while the other shuts it down. You want to be firm, clear, unapologetic about your position, but not dismissive of the person or idea. You're attacking the argument, not the person, and the language distinction matters. I don't think that will work as firm. You're wrong as hostile. Same disagreement, different relational outcome. The second technique is data drops without lectures. If you disagree based on evidence, present the evidence concisely and let it speak. Not, well, actually, if you look at the research, there have been 17 studies on this topic, and the meta-analysis shows. That's insufferable. Instead, the meta-analysis on this is clear. 3 factors drive outcomes. We're ignoring 2 of them. Sometimes you need to concede part of the argument to maintain credibility for the part you're defending. This is strategic concession. You're right that implementation will be complex. I'm not minimizing that. Where I disagree is on the timeline. The complexity is manageable if we phase it. You've given ground on one point, which makes you look reasonable. You've held ground on the point that matters to you, and you've proposed a solution, which shifts the conversation from whether to how. This is advanced disagreement. You're not fighting for total victory. You're fighting for the outcome you need while maintaining the relationship. Here's a real scenario to show how this plays out. You're in a meeting. Your colleague proposes a solution to a client problem. You think the solution will fail because it ignores a key constraint. The weak move is to stay silent and let them proceed. The hostile move is to say, that won't work. The powerful move is to say, I appreciate the creative thinking here. The client relationship angle you're emphasizing is critical. My concern is that we're assuming they can implement on their current infrastructure, and from my conversation with their tech lead last week, that's not the case. Can we talk about what it would take to address that gap? You've complimented their effort. You've agreed with part of their thinking. You've introduced new information that supports your concern, and you've framed it as a collaborative problem to solve, not a debate to win. Now let's talk about how you own meetings, because meetings are where a lot of professional authority is won or lost. You can be brilliant at your desk, but if you can't command a conference room, your influence will always be limited. Owning a meeting doesn't mean dominating every conversation or being the loudest voice. It means being the gravitational center, the person around whom the discussion orbits, whether you're speaking or not. And there are specific techniques to make that happen. Pre-meeting positioning is the first layer. Most people walk into meetings cold, reacting to whatever agenda has been set. But if you want to own the meeting, you shape the agenda before it's finalized. You send a message beforehand. I'd like to add 5 minutes to discuss X. It's relevant to the decision we're making. You're not asking permission. You're informing. You're also creating a moment where everyone knows you'll be speaking, which means they'll be listening for it. Even if you don't get your item on the formal agenda, you've signaled that you have something to contribute, which primes people to pay attention when you speak. Seating psychology matters more than most people realize. If you can choose where you sit, don't hide in the corners or the middle of a long side of the table. Position yourself where you have sight lines to everyone, where your face is visible, and ideally where there's some association with the head of the table. If you're not running the meeting, you obviously don't take the head seat, but adjacent to it or across from it gives you strong positioning. If it's a virtual meeting, your camera position and background matter. You want to be well lit, centered in the frame, with a clean background that doesn't distract. These are small details, but they compound into an impression of professionalism and authority. The agenda interrupt is a high-risk, high-reward move. This is when the meeting is drifting, going down an unproductive path, or missing the key issue. Most people sit quietly, maybe feeling frustrated but not wanting to be rude. But if you've established some authority, you can interrupt the meeting itself. Not someone's sentence, but the flow of the conversation. Before we go further down this path, can we pause and make sure we're solving the right problem? Or, I want to make sure we have time for the decision we actually need to make. Can we table this part and come back to it? You're redirecting the group. This only works if you're right about the meeting being off track, and if you've built enough credibility that people trust your judgment. But when it works, it positions you as a leader, someone who sees the bigger picture and has the courage to steer. Summarization is one of the most underrated power moves in meetings. When a discussion has been going for a while, things get muddy. People have said different things. There's confusion about what's been decided or what the disagreement even is. If you can step in and summarize clearly, you own the narrative. Let me make sure I'm tracking. We agree on X. The disagreement is about Y, and the question we need to answer is Z. Does that sound right? You've imposed structure on chaos. You've clarified what matters. And you've positioned yourself as the person who can make sense of the complexity. Even if you're not the most senior person in the room, this move elevates you because leadership is often just clarity under pressure. Meeting end anchors are how you ensure your priorities survive the room. Meetings end, and then action items get fuzzy. People remember different things. Follow-up doesn't happen. If you want to own the outcome, you create the anchor at the end. Before we close, let me capture the key action items. Sarah, you're doing X by Friday. I'm doing Y by Tuesday. And we're reconvening on Wednesday to finalize Z. You've done two things. You've made the commitments explicit and public, which increases follow-through. And you've positioned yourself as the person who's driving the next steps. Even if you didn't run the meeting, you're now the center of the post-meeting execution. Let's move now to one of the highest stakes communication scenarios, which is presentations. Public speaking terrifies most people, not because they don't know their material, but because they can't hide. Everyone is looking at you. Every nervous tell is visible. Every verbal stumble is audible. The pressure is immense, and the consequences of failure can be significant. But here's the thing. The difference between a nervous presentation and a commanding one often comes down to a handful of techniques that you can learn and practice until they're automatic. The first is what I call the confidence loop. This is a set of physiological hacks that trick your body into feeling confident, even when your mind is panicking. Start with your posture. Stand or sit with your full height. Shoulders back but not rigid. Feet planted. If you're standing, distribute your weight evenly. Don't shift or sway. Your body position affects your mental state. Expansive postures, where you're taking up space, increase testosterone and decrease cortisol. You literally feel more confident because your body is signaling confidence to your brain. Closed postures, where you're hunched or contracted, do the opposite. They make you feel smaller and more anxious. Next is breathing. We've talked about this before, but it's especially critical before and during presentations. Right before you start, take 3 deep breaths. Slow inhale through your nose, filling your belly. Slow exhale through your mouth, emptying completely. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms you down. During the presentation, if you feel anxiety spiking, pause and breathe. It will feel like an eternity to you. It will look like a purposeful pause to your audience. They won't know you're managing nerves. They'll think you're being deliberate. Visualization is another tool. Before the presentation, close your eyes and run through it mentally. Not the content, but the feeling. Visualize yourself speaking clearly. See the audience engaged. Feel the sense of control and calm. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined experience and real experience. By visualizing success, you're creating a mental blueprint that your brain will try to follow when you're actually presenting. This sounds like woo, but it's backed by sports psychology and neuroscience. Athletes use this constantly. You should too. Now let's talk about script versus outline. Many people try to memorize their presentations word for word. This is almost always a mistake. If you memorize, you're terrified of forgetting. Every sentence becomes a test of your memory instead of a communication of your ideas. And if you do forget, you freeze. You have no flexibility. The better approach is to have a clear outline. Know your key points. Know your opening and closing verbatim because those are the highest stakes moments. But the middle can be more flexible. You know the territory you're covering. You have your data and examples ready, but you're not locked into exact phrasing. This makes you more natural. It also makes you more resilient. If you lose your place, you just move to the next point. No panic. Audience scanning is a technique that keeps you connected and gives you real-time feedback. As you present, don't stare at your slides or look at one person or scan the room so fast that you're making eye contact with no one. Instead, use the triangulation method. Divide the room into 3 sections, left, center, right. In each section, pick a person and speak a full sentence or thought to them, making eye contact. Then move to another section and do the same. This creates the impression that you're speaking to everyone individually. It also helps you gauge engagement. If people are nodding, you're landing. If they're confused, you may need to slow down or clarify. If they're distracted, you may need to shift tactics. Your audience is giving you information. Use it. Handling tech failures mid-talk is where a lot of people lose their composure. The slides don't work. The video won't play. The mic cuts out. These things happen. The amateur panics or apologizes profusely. The professional adapts without breaking stride. If your slides die, keep going without them. The slide would show you X, but let me describe it. Q&A at the end of a presentation is its own skill. This is where you can reinforce your authority or undermine everything you built. The key is the three-part answer structure. Someone asks a question. First, you acknowledge it. That's a great question, or I'm glad you asked that. This buys you a second to think and makes the questioner feel heard. Second, you answer concisely. No rambling. Get to the point. Third, you check for understanding or link it back to your main message. Does that address it? Or this ties back to the earlier point about X. This structure keeps you in control. You're not just reacting. You're guiding the exchange. Sometimes you get a hostile question or one that's designed to trap you. Don't get defensive. Don't attack back. Stay calm and reframe. If someone says, "Isn't this just a more expensive version of what we already do?" you could say, "I understand why it might look that way. The difference is X, which creates Y outcome we're not getting now. The cost increase is real, and it's justified by Z. You've acknowledged their concern. You've corrected their misunderstanding. You've provided reasoning. You didn't get flustered, and you didn't dismiss them. This is Q&A mastery. Let's shift to one-on-one conversations because these require a different set of skills. In a group, you're performing. In a one-on-one, you're connecting. The challenge is balancing intimacy with authority. You want the person to feel heard and valued, but you also need to maintain your position. This is especially tricky if you're giving feedback, having a difficult conversation, or managing someone. The wrong balance makes you either cold and unapproachable or friendly but ineffective. Rapport without weakness starts with your physical presence. In a one-on-one, especially if it's a difficult conversation, your body language needs to signal openness without submission. Sit at an angle rather than directly across. Direct across feels confrontational. Side by side can feel too casual or like you're avoiding eye contact. An angle is collaborative. Lean in slightly to show engagement, but don't invade their space. Keep your hands visible and open. Crossed arms or hidden hands signal defensiveness or secrecy. Your face should be attentive, not frozen. You want to mirror their emotional state to a degree. If they're upset, your face should show concern. If they're energized, you can reflect some of that. But you're calibrating, not matching exactly. You're the steady center. The SBI feedback model is a structure that works for difficult conversations. SBI stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact. You describe the specific situation where something happened in yesterday's client meeting. Then you describe the specific behavior you observed. When the client raised concerns about timeline, you said we'd push back the deadline without checking with the team. Then you describe the impact. That put us in a position where we're either breaking a promise to the client or over-promising to the team. This is clean. It's not accusatory. You're not saying you're irresponsible or you always do this. You're describing objective facts and their consequences. This makes it much harder for the other person to get defensive because you're not attacking their character. Difficult truth-telling is one of the hardest communication skills. Someone needs to hear something they don't want to hear. Maybe their performance is slipping. Maybe they're not going to get the promotion. Maybe their idea isn't going to be approved. You have to deliver the truth in a way that's clear but not cruel. The mistake most people make is softening so much that the truth gets lost. I think you're doing great, and we really value your work. But there are just a few tiny areas where maybe you could potentially improve just a little bit. The person leaves that conversation thinking they're doing fine. You failed to communicate. The other extreme is being so blunt that you destroy the relationship. Your work isn't good enough. You need to fix it or you're gone. That might be true, but the delivery makes the person defensive or demoralized. The middle path is direct but respectful. I need to be straight with you. Your performance over the last quarter hasn't met expectations. Specifically, X and Y have been below standard. I want to support you in turning this around, and here's what that needs to look like. You've been clear. You've been specific. You've shown you care about their success. But you haven't sugar-coated the truth. They know where they stand. This is difficult truth-telling done right. It respects the person enough to be honest and supportive enough to offer a path forward. Listening that leads is a concept that confuses people. They think listening is passive, that if you're really listening, you're just absorbing without directing. But that's not how leaders listen. Leaders listen actively. They ask clarifying questions. They summarize what they're hearing to make sure they understand. They guide the conversation toward useful ground. If someone is venting or stuck in a problem, you listen and then you redirect. I hear that you're frustrated about X. That makes sense. What I'm also hearing is that why might be the deeper issue. Can we talk about that? You're listening, but you're also steering towards something productive. Ending conversations on your terms is a small but significant power move. Most people let conversations trail off or wait for the other person to end it. But if you're the one who closes, you control the last impression. As the conversation reaches a natural endpoint, you wrap it. This has been helpful. I'm clear on next steps. Let's reconnect Friday. You've signaled the conversation is over. You've summarized the outcome. You've set the follow-up. The other person isn't left wondering if there's more to discuss or when they'll hear from you. You've closed the loop cleanly. This is especially important with people who tend to ramble or who might otherwise keep you longer than necessary. You're not being rude. You're being efficient and clear. Now let's talk about crisis communication, because this is where authority is tested most severely. Things go wrong. Projects fail. Mistakes happen. Markets shift. In those moments, how you communicate determines whether people rally around you or abandon you. The first 20 words out of your mouth in a crisis are more important than the next 200. They set the tone. They determine whether people panic or trust you to handle it. The chaos anchor is what those first words need to be. You need to say something that's true, clear, and stabilizing. Not, everything is fine, if everything is clearly not fine. That kills your credibility instantly. Not, I don't know what to do, because that creates panic. The chaos anchor is a statement of reality plus control. We have a problem. Here's what I know. Here's what we're doing. That's it. You've acknowledged the crisis. You've shown you have information. You've indicated action is happening. People can panic or they can follow your lead. You're giving them a lead to follow. Transparency versus oversharing is a critical balance. In a crisis, people want information. But they don't want every detail, especially if some details are speculative or would increase panic without adding value. You need to share what people need to know and what they need to do. You don't need to share every unknown, every fear, every worst-case scenario that's running through your head. Here's the situation. Here's what caused it. Here's what we're doing to fix it. Here's what I need from you. That's transparency. I don't know if this will work, and if it doesn't, we might be in serious trouble. And I'm really worried about X and Y is oversharing. The first builds confidence. The second erodes it. Certainty and uncertainty is one of the paradoxes of crisis leadership. You don't have all the answers. You don't know how this will play out. But you can't communicate that uncertainty without a container of certainty around it. The certainty is in your process, your values, your commitment. I don't know yet what the final outcome will be. What I do know is that we're analyzing X, we're implementing Y, and we're committed to Z principle as we navigate this. You've been honest about the unknown, but you've given people certainty about how you're approaching the unknown. That's enough to keep them following you. Blame-free problem framing is essential if you want to actually solve the crisis instead of devolving into finger-pointing. In the immediate crisis, blame is a distraction. It uses energy that should be going towards solutions. Later, after the crisis is resolved, you can do a post-mortem and address accountability. But in the moment, frame the problem as a shared challenge. We're in this situation. The cause doesn't matter right now. What matters is how we get out of it. Here's the plan. You're not letting people off the hook permanently. You're just deferring that conversation until it's useful. Action step clarity is the final piece of crisis communication. People in a crisis want to know what to do. If you leave them without clear direction, they'll either freeze or start improvising, which often makes things worse. Your job is to give them specific, actionable steps. For the next 2 hours, the sales team pauses all outreach. Ops team, you're gathering data on X. Leadership, we're meeting at 4 o'clock to finalize the response. Everyone knows what they're doing. No one is guessing. This creates a sense of order in the chaos, which is calming and productive. Let's talk about reading rooms, because one of the hallmarks of great communicators is their ability to adapt. The same message delivered the same way to different audiences will land completely differently. You need to be able to walk into any room, quickly assess who you're talking to, and calibrate your communication to maximize impact. This isn't being fake. This is being fluent. Demographic decoding is the first layer. Age matters. A room full of senior executives in their 60s will respond differently than a room of mid-level managers in their 30s. The executives probably value brevity, experience, and respect for hierarchy. The managers might value collaboration, innovation, and data. Industry matters. Tech people often want to move fast and are comfortable with risk. Financial services people want precision and risk mitigation. Geography matters. Communication norms in New York are different from those in Tokyo or Sao Paulo. You need to know enough about your audience to not violate their norms while still maintaining your core message. Formality. Calibration is about matching the temperature of the room without losing yourself. Some environments are buttoned up. Suits, formal titles, structured agendas. Others are casual. First names, jeans, open-ended conversations. If you walk into a formal environment and you're too casual, you'll seem disrespectful or unprofessional. If you walk into a casual environment and you're too formal, you'll seem stiff or out of touch. You want to be in the range of acceptable for that room, maybe slightly more formal or slightly more casual depending on what you're trying to achieve, but not so far outside the range that you alienate people. Jargon versus plain speak is a constant calibration. If you're talking to people in your field, jargon can be efficient. It signals you're one of them. But if you're talking to people outside your field, jargon is exclusionary and confusing. You need to know when to use technical language and when to translate. The best communicators can switch between the two seamlessly. They can talk deeply with experts and then immediately turn and explain the same concept simply to a non-expert. This is fluency. You're not dumbing things down for everyone. You're matching your language to your audience's knowledge level. Cultural communication norms go beyond just geography. Even within a company or industry, different teams or functions can have different norms. Engineers might value directness and precision. Marketing might value storytelling and emotional resonance. Finance might value numbers and risk framing. If you're presenting to a cross-functional group, you need to hit multiple of these norms in a single message. This is advanced room reading. You're not just adapting to one audience. You're adapting to multiple audiences simultaneously. The chameleon trap is when adaptability goes too far and you lose your authenticity. If you change so much from room to room that you have no consistent core, people will sense it. They'll feel like you're performing, like they don't know the real you, and that kills trust. The goal is to adapt your delivery, your examples, your framing, while keeping your core message and values consistent. You're translating, not transforming. You're the same person in every room, just speaking the language that room understands best. Now let's talk about digital dominance, because increasingly, communication happens through screens, emails, and text. The principles we've discussed still apply, but the medium adds new layers of complexity. You can't rely on physical presence. Your vocal tone might be absent or distorted. Your words exist in a permanent record. You need a different toolkit to command authority digitally. Video call presence starts with the technical basics. Camera at eye level or slightly above, never below, because that's an unflattering angle that makes you look less authoritative. Lighting on your face, not behind you. If the light is behind you, you're a silhouette. Clean background, or a slight blur if your background is messy. These seem trivial, but they compound into an impression. A well-lit, well-framed video presence signals professionalism and control. A dark, poorly framed presence signals the opposite. Your eye contact on video is different from in person. You need to look at the camera, not at the screen where you see the other people. This is hard because it feels unnatural. You want to look at their faces. But if you look at the screen, they see you looking down. If you look at the camera, they feel like you're making eye contact with them. Practice this. It makes a huge difference in perceived engagement and authority. Your vocal energy on video needs to be slightly higher than in person. The medium flattens you a bit. What feels like normal energy in person can read as low energy on screen. You need to bring slightly more animation to your voice and face to compensate. Not over the top, just 5 to 10% more. This keeps you engaging instead of monotone. Email power structures are a whole communication system. Your subject line determines whether your email gets opened and how it's prioritized. Vague subject lines like quick question or following up get ignored. Specific subject lines like decision needed by EOD, budget allocation get action. Your opening sentence matters. If you bury your point in the third paragraph, most people will never get there. Lead with what you need or what's most important. Your closing determines what happens next. Weak closings like let me know what you think leave the ball in limbo. Strong closings like please confirm by Thursday create clear expectations. Slack and Teams tone management is about understanding that these platforms are asynchronous but feel synchronous. People read your messages out of context. They don't have your tone of voice or facial expressions. What you intend as efficient can read as curt. What you intend as friendly can read as unprofessional. You need to be slightly warmer in text than you would be in person to avoid sounding cold, but not so warm that you undermine your authority. It's a balance. Punctuation matters. Ending sentences with periods can read as aggressive in casual text platforms. Exclamation points can seem overeager. Learn the norms of your organization and calibrate. Response timing psychology is real. If you respond instantly to every message, you signal that you're always available, which can lower your perceived status. If you take days to respond, you signal disrespect or disorganization. The sweet spot depends on the urgency and the relationship. For most professional messages, responding within a few hours to a day is appropriate. For urgent matters, faster. For low-priority matters, you can batch and respond on your schedule. The key is being consistent so people know what to expect from you. Async leadership through voice notes or short videos is an underutilized tool. Instead of a long email, record a 2-minute video explaining your thinking. Instead of back-and-forth text, send a voice note. This adds tone and nuance that text can't convey. It also signals investment. You took the time to record something personal rather than dashing off a quick text. This is especially effective for complex topics, feedback, or motivational messages. But like any tool, it can be overused. Not every message warrants a video. Use it strategically when the medium adds value. Now let's talk about sustaining command over time, because authority isn't just about individual moments. It's about building a reputation that precedes you. When people hear your name, what do they think? When they quote you in your absence, what do they say? This is reputation architecture, and it's the long game of linguistic authority. Signature phrases are one tool for building memorable communication. These are phrases you use consistently that become associated with you. Maybe it's how you frame problems. Maybe it's a specific metaphor or analogy. Maybe it's a particular way of challenging ideas. Steve Jobs had one more thing. Jeff Bezos has, "It's still day one." These aren't slogans. They're linguistic markers that reinforce a specific way of thinking. You don't need to manufacture these. Often they emerge naturally from your values and perspective. But once you notice them, you can use them intentionally. The key is that they have to be authentic. If you're forcing a catchphrase, people will sense it. Consistency versus predictability is a tension you have to manage. You want people to know what to expect from you in terms of values, quality, and approach. That's consistency, and it builds trust. But you don't want to be so predictable that you become boring or easy to dismiss. Oh, that's just how they always respond. You need to be consistent in your core while varying your tactics. People should know you'll always be direct, but not exactly how you'll frame your directness. They should know you always prioritize data, but not which data you'll cite. Consistency in principles, variation in execution. The myth gap is the strategic use of mystery. Not everything about you needs to be known. Not every process needs to be explained. Some level of inscrutability makes people pay more attention. If you're too transparent, too open, too available, you become ordinary. There's nothing left to wonder about. The myth gap doesn't mean lying or hiding. It means being selective about what you share and leaving some space for people to fill in with their own perceptions, which are often more flattering than reality. Handling misquotes and misinterpretations is inevitable as your reputation grows. Someone will misrepresent what you said. Someone will take something out of context. You have to decide whether to correct it or let it go. Not every misquote is worth addressing. If it's minor or doesn't materially affect you, moving on is often. Let's talk about self-correction systems, because even with all these skills, you'll drift. You'll slide back into old patterns. You'll pick up new bad habits. You need systems to catch yourself and correct course. The post-conversation audit is a mental practice. After important conversations or meetings, take 2 minutes to reflect. What went well? Where did I stumble? Did I hedge when I should have been definitive? Did I dominate when I should have listened? Did I lose the room, and how? This isn't self-flagellation. It's data collection. You're building awareness of your patterns so you can adjust. Peer feedback protocols are essential, but you have to choose your feedback sources carefully. Not everyone's opinion is worth incorporating. You want feedback from people who are good communicators themselves, who understand your goals, and who will be honest with you. Ask specific questions. Did I come across as defensive when I answered that challenge? Is better than how did I do? Specific questions get useful answers. General questions get platitudes. Recording analysis is uncomfortable but invaluable. Once a quarter, record yourself in a meeting or presentation. Watch it back. Listen to your vocal patterns. Watch your body language. Count your filler words. Note where you lost energy or clarity. This is brutal honesty time. You'll see things you don't want to see. That's the point. Awareness precedes improvement. Stress testing your skills under pressure is how you build real mastery. Practice isn't just rehearsing in comfortable conditions. It's deliberately putting yourself in difficult scenarios and seeing how your skills hold up. Volunteer to lead the contentious meeting. Take the client call where you know you'll face tough questions. Present to the skeptical audience. These are reps under pressure. Each one builds your capacity to stay composed and authoritative when it matters. The plateau problem is real. You'll improve rapidly at first, then you'll hit a level where you're competent and improvement slows. This is where most people stop. They're good enough, so they coast. But if you want to be truly exceptional, you have to push through plateaus. That means seeking harder challenges, getting more sophisticated feedback, and being willing to feel uncomfortable again as you try new techniques. Mastery is not a destination. It's a process of continuous refinement. Let's talk about the power of restraint, because one of the most counterintuitive communication lessons is that sometimes less is more. In a culture that rewards being heard, that equates presence with constant contribution, holding back feels like weakness. But strategic restraint is actually a form of dominance. When you speak less frequently but more powerfully, your words carry more weight. People listen more carefully because they know you choose your moments. Strategic silence in meetings is one application. You don't comment on everything. You listen, you observe, and then, at the moment when it matters, you speak. Your contribution isn't one of many. It's the one that shifts the conversation. This requires confidence. It requires being comfortable with the tension of not filling every space. But the payoff is that when you do speak, people assume what you're saying is important because you've demonstrated you don't speak unless it is. The one-sentence response is a powerful tool in the right context. Someone asks you a complex question. The instinct is to give a complex answer, to show your thinking, to prove you've considered all the angles. But sometimes the authoritative move is brevity, a single, clear sentence that answers the question without elaboration. This signals confidence. You're not justifying, you're not hedging, you're declaring, and then you stop. If they need more, they'll ask. But often, the one sentence is enough, and it lands harder than 3 paragraphs would have. Withholding information strategically creates scarcity and attention. This is not about being secretive or manipulative. It's about understanding that if you give people everything at once, they have no reason to stay engaged. If you parcel information out, if you reveal things progressively, you keep people leaning in. This is especially effective in negotiations or when building buy-in for a proposal. You don't lead with your final offer or your complete plan. You start with enough to create interest, and you reveal more as the conversation progresses. Slow speech in fast moments is a power move that requires real control. When everyone else is speaking quickly, reacting, competing for airtime, you slow down. You speak deliberately. This creates contrast. It makes you sound calm and in control, while others sound frantic. It forces people to slow down and listen because you're not matching their pace. This is the vocal equivalent of walking slowly in a crowd that's running. It's conspicuous and commanding. Editing yourself in real time is the discipline of cutting what doesn't need to be said. As you're speaking, you monitor yourself. Is this sentence necessary? Am I starting to ramble? Have I made my point? If yes, stop. Even if you have more to say, even if you've thought of a great example, stop. Make your point and let it land. You can always add more if needed, but you can't take back words that diluted your message. Real-time editing is one of the hardest skills because it requires you to be simultaneously in the conversation and above it, monitoring your own performance while delivering it. Now let's address conflict as theater, because conflict is unavoidable in any context where decisions matter. How you navigate confrontation determines whether you're seen as a leader or a problem. The goal is not to avoid conflict. It's to handle it in a way that strengthens your position and preserves relationships where possible. Escalation management means knowing how to de-escalate when emotions are rising. Someone is getting heated. Their voice is rising. They're becoming personal. The amateur matches that energy, which leads to a shouting match. The professional stays calm and lowers the temperature. You slow your speech. You lower your volume slightly. You keep your body language open. You acknowledge their emotion without matching it. I can see this is really important to you. Let's make sure we solve it. You're not dismissing them. You're containing the explosion so it doesn't consume the conversation. The tactical apology is one of the most misunderstood tools. Some people never apologize because they think it's weakness. Some people apologize constantly. Neither is right. A tactical apology is when you apologize for something specific that you actually did wrong and you do it strategically to move forward. I should have consulted you before making that decision. That was my mistake. This isn't groveling. It's accountability. And it disarms the other person. They came in ready to fight. and you've acknowledged the fault, which takes away their ammunition. Now you can move to solving the problem instead of defending yourself. Reframing attacks as misunderstandings is a technique that preserves relationship while defending your position. Someone says something aggressive or accusatory. Instead of responding in kind, you reframe it as a communication gap. I think there might be a misunderstanding about what I meant. Let me clarify. You're not saying they're wrong to be upset. You're suggesting that the source of their upset is a misunderstanding, which is easier to fix than a genuine disagreement. And often it actually is a misunderstanding. People react to what they thought you said or meant, not necessarily what you actually said or meant. Public versus private conflict resolution is about knowing which fights to have in front of an audience and which to save for one-on-one. If someone challenges you in a meeting, you usually need to respond in the meeting. You can't defer to later because that looks like you're avoiding or like the challenge stands uncontested. But your response in public should be measured and professional. You address the substance, not the person. Then, if there's a deeper relational issue, you handle that privately. Can we talk after this? You've maintained your authority in public and created space to address the personal dynamic where it won't escalate in front of others. Winning without humiliating is critical for long-term relationships. You might be right. You might decisively win an argument. But if you rub their face in it, if you make them look stupid or weak, you've made an enemy. And that enemy will look for opportunities to undermine you later. The skilled move is to win graciously. You make your point. You prevail. But you give the other person space to save face. You acknowledge the validity of their concerns even as you explain why your solution is better. You frame it as both of you ultimately wanting the same outcome. This way you win the argument but keep the relationship. Let's talk about influence without authority, because many of you are in positions where you need to lead but don't have formal power. You can't order people to do things. You have to persuade. This is actually harder and more valuable than leading with authority because it requires pure communication skill. You don't have the shortcut of rank. You have to win people over. Peer persuasion mechanics start with understanding what motivates your peers. They're not motivated by your priorities. They're motivated by their priorities. Your job is to connect what you need to what they need. If you want a colleague to support your project, you don't lead with why it's important to you. You lead with why it will help them. This will reduce the bottleneck you've been dealing with, or this will make your team's workflow easier. You're not manipulating. You're translating your request into terms that resonate with their goals. Idea crediting is the coalition build is offline influence. Before the meeting where a decision gets made, you've already had one-on-one conversations with the key stakeholders. You've addressed their concerns. You've secured their support. By the time you get to the formal meeting, the decision is essentially made. The meeting is just the public confirmation. This isn't sneaky. It's effective. It's understanding that decisions happen in conversations, not in meetings. Meetings are where decisions get announced. Upward management is leading your boss. This is delicate because you can't be insubordinate, but you can influence their thinking. The technique is asking questions that lead them to your conclusion. Have we considered what happens if X? What's our risk tolerance on Y? How do we want to handle Z? You're not telling them what to do. You're surfacing considerations that guide them toward the decision you think is right. And if they arrive at that decision through their own reasoning process, they'll own it and support it more fully than if you just advocated for it directly. Soft power sentences are phrases that propose without demanding. What if we tried? I wonder if one option might be. These feel tentative, and in some contexts they are. But in lateral relationships, they're actually strategic. They create space for collaboration. They don't trigger defensiveness the way we should do X might. You're inviting people into the idea rather than pushing it on them. Once they're in, once they're contributing, the idea becomes shared, and you've achieved influence without authority. Now we need to talk about teaching others to listen. Because ultimately, part of commanding the room is training the room to respond to you in specific ways. You can do everything right, but if your team or organization has no culture of listening, you'll still struggle. So part of your job is to shape the norms around you. Setting explicit expectations means telling people how you want to be engaged with. This sounds obvious, but most people never do it. They hope people will figure out the right way to communicate with them. But hope is not a strategy. In a team meeting, you say, "When I'm presenting, I'd like to get through the full arc before we dig into questions. I'll pause and ask for input at specific points." You've set a norm. Now, if someone interrupts, you're not being arbitrary when you redirect them. You're reinforcing a norm you established. Reinforcement. Cycles are about rewarding the behavior. you want and correcting what you don't. When someone waits until you've finished and then asks a thoughtful question, you acknowledge it. That's a great question, and I appreciate you letting me finish the thought first. You've reinforced the behavior. When someone interrupts, you use the redirect techniques we discussed earlier. Consistent reinforcement creates patterns. People learn how to engage with you effectively because you've taught them. Modeling without preaching is powerful. You can tell people to listen carefully, not interrupt, and be thoughtful. Or you can demonstrate those behaviors yourself. When someone is speaking, you give them your full attention. You don't interrupt. You ask clarifying questions. You summarize what you heard before responding. People notice, and they start to mirror those behaviors, especially if they see that you reward them when they do. Calling out interruptions constructively is necessary sometimes. If someone repeatedly interrupts you or others, you address it. Not in the moment where it would escalate, but afterward privately. I noticed in the meeting you jumped in several times before people were finished. I don't think you mean to, but it's making it hard for people to share their full thinking. Can you help me create space for everyone? You're not attacking. You're asking for partnership and creating a better dynamic. Most people don't realize they're doing it and will adjust once it's brought to their awareness. Creating a culture of attentive listening is the long game. You model it. You reward it. You make it explicit that thoughtful listening is valued in your team or organization. Over time, it becomes the norm. And when that happens, your communication becomes exponentially more effective because you're not fighting for attention. You have it. Let's bring this all together with a 30-day transformation sprint. This is a practical implementation system that embeds these skills into your daily practice so they become automatic. Week 1 is syntax overhaul. For 7 days, your focus is eliminating hedges and cleaning up your sentence structures. Every email, every message, every conversation, you're monitoring for I think, maybe, just, sorry, when it doesn't belong. You're practicing active voice and subject-first construction. You're counting your filler words. This week is brutal because you'll realize how much you do these things. But by day 7, you'll have started to catch yourself in real time and correct. Week 2 is vocal control drills. You're working on downward inflection, strategic pauses, and pace variation. Every morning you spend 5 minutes reading a passage out loud, focusing on these elements. You record yourself in at least 3 conversations or meetings this week. You listen back and note where your vocal patterns are strong and where they need work. By the end of week 2, these techniques should start feeling more natural. Week 3 is high-stakes simulations. You're finding opportunities to practice under pressure. Volunteer to lead the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Take the presentation you're nervous about. Jump into the contentious meeting. You're stress testing everything you've learned in the first 2 weeks. You'll stumble. That's expected. But each rep builds your capacity to execute when it matters. Week 4 is real-world deployment plus feedback. You're now using these skills in your actual work without the training wheels. And you're actively seeking feedback. You're asking trusted colleagues, did I come across clearly in that meeting? You're comparing your performance to where you started. By the end of week 4, these skills should be starting to feel integrated. Not perfect, not automatic, but integrated enough that you can build on them. The daily 10-minute rituals that support this sprint are simple. Morning, read a paragraph of a speech or article out loud with attention to vocal technique. Midday, review a message or email you've sent and audit it for power-draining language. Evening, reflect on one communication moment from the day and identify what you'd do differently. 10 minutes total. This compounds over 30 days into significant growth. Now, let's troubleshoot the most common failure points, because knowing the techniques is one thing, executing consistently is another. Here are the 12 most common authority breakdowns and how to fix them. I still get interrupted. You're not using silence effectively. You're pausing mid-sentence instead of at sentence completion, which creates openings. Or you're not using the redirect and callback hold techniques. Practice finishing your sentences even when someone starts talking. Practice the I'll get to that redirect. People don't take me seriously. Check your hedging. You're likely still using qualifiers that undermine you. Record yourself and count. Also, check your vocal inflection. If you're using upspeak, you're signaling uncertainty. Flatten your inflection at the end of statements. I sound arrogant. You're not balancing assertion with acknowledgement. You're making strong claims without showing you've considered other perspectives. Use a steel manning. Acknowledge valid concerns before stating your position. This shows confidence without dismissing others. I freeze under pressure. You need more stress testing. Your skills aren't integrated enough to survive high-stakes situations. Deliberately put yourself in more pressure situations. Also work on your confidence loop. Your physiology is undermining you. My team doesn't listen. You haven't set explicit expectations or reinforced them consistently. Have the conversation about norms. Model the behavior you want. And start using consequences. If someone consistently doesn't listen, address it directly. I can't read the room. You're too focused on your content and not enough on the audience. Practice audience scanning during presentations. After meetings, reflect on what you noticed about people's reactions. Build this muscle deliberately. I talk too much. You need to work on the 50% rule. Say half of what you're planning to say. Practice one-sentence responses. Get comfortable with silence. And ask yourself before you speak, does this add value or am I just filling space? I talk too little. You're waiting for permission or for the perfect moment. Neither exists. Practice speaking in the first 5 minutes of meetings. Don't wait until you have the perfect point. Make a contribution early, even a small one, to establish presence. My voice shakes. This is physiology. You need to work on breathing and the confidence loop. Deep breaths before you speak. And practice speaking in lower stakes situations until your body learns it's not actually a threat. I get defensive. You're taking challenges as personal attacks. Separate your ego from your ideas. Practice reframing attacks as misunderstandings or as genuine questions about the substance, not about you. I can't handle conflict. You're conflict avoidant, which makes conflict feel bigger and scarier. Expose yourself to small conflicts deliberately. Disagree on something minor. Practice the steel manning and reframing techniques in low-stakes situations. I sound robotic. You've overcorrected. You focus so much on technique that you've lost your humanity. Bring some personality back. Use examples from your life. Let your passion for the topic. As you grow in your career and life, your command will need to evolve. The voice that works early in your career won't necessarily work later. Let's talk about how your leadership presence adapts across a lifetime. Early career authority is about proving yourself. You're establishing credibility. You're showing you belong. Your communication tends to be data-heavy. You cite sources. You show your work. You're building trust by demonstrating competence. This is appropriate. Don't try to skip this phase, but also don't get stuck in it. There comes a point where you've proven yourself and you can start communicating from a base of established credibility. Mid-career refinement is about leading teams. Now you're not just proving your own competence. You're enabling others. Your communication shifts to being more inclusive. You ask more questions. You create space for others to contribute. But you don't lose your authority. You're still making clear decisions. You're still directing. You're just doing it in a way that develops your team. Senior leadership presence is about enterprise influence. You're setting direction for large organizations or initiatives. Your communication becomes more strategic. You talk about vision, values, long-term direction. You speak in broader terms because the details are being handled by others. You're painting the picture of where you're going and why. Your authority is assumed. You're not proving yourself anymore. You're inspiring and guiding. Post-career wisdom is about mentorship. If you stay engaged after you've retired or moved on, your voice becomes advisory. You're sharing lessons from experience. You're asking questions that help others think, not telling them what to do. You've earned the right to be more reflective, more philosophical. Your authority comes from the life you've lived and the perspective you've gained. Adaptation without reinvention means that while the emphasis shifts, your core doesn't. You're still direct. You're still clear. You're still committed to the principles we've discussed. You're just applying them differently based on your context and stage. So here we are. You've been through the full system. You understand the patterns that undermine authority and the ones that create it. You know how to structure your sentences, control your voice, manage your presence. You know how to handle interruptions, navigate conflict, read rooms, and adapt to different contexts. You know how to communicate in person and digitally. You know how to build a reputation and sustain it over time. You know how to teach others to listen and how to lead without formal authority. And you know how to troubleshoot when things go wrong and how to evolve as your career progresses. But here's the thing. Knowledge is not execution. You can know all of this and still communicate the way you always have because your habits are strong and change is uncomfortable. The transformation from knowing to doing requires commitment. It requires deliberate practice. It requires being willing to be bad at these new techniques until you get good at them. It requires accepting that you'll stumble, that you'll fall back into old patterns, that some days you'll nail it, and some days you won't. The question is, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to record yourself and listen back even though it's uncomfortable? Are you willing to seek feedback and hear things you don't want to hear? Are you willing to put yourself in high-stakes situations before you feel ready? Are you willing to do the daily 10-minute practice even when it feels silly or pointless? Because that's what separates people who read about communication from people who transform their communication. Think about the two versions of you we started with. The one who froze mid-sentence, who felt authority slip away, who struggled to be heard. And the one who walked into the room, commanded attention from the first word, guided the conversation, and left with people following your lead. The gap between those two versions isn't talent. It's not some innate gift that you either have or you don't. It's skill, it's technique, it's practice, and it's now available to you. You know how to build your first 10 seconds. You know how to structure your openings. You know how to eliminate the language that's been undermining you. You know how to use your voice as an instrument. You know how to handle the people who try to talk over you or dismiss you. You know how to tell stories that land, disagree without retreating, and communicate through crisis. You know how to own meetings and presentations. You know how to read any room and adapt. You know how to lead digitally. And you know how to sustain this over time. The only question left is, what are you going to do with it? Because here's the truth. You can listen to this entire audiobook, nod along, agree with the principles, and then go back to communicating exactly the way you did before. Or you can take one technique, just one, and implement it this week. You can eliminate just from your vocabulary. You can practice downward inflection. You can work on your first 10 seconds. You can record yourself in your next meeting, just one thing. And then next week you add one more, and then one more. And 6 months from now you're a different communicator. People notice. Doors open that were closed. Opportunities emerge. You're leading conversations you used to watch from the sidelines. The language of natural leaders isn't natural. It's learned. It's practiced. It's earned. And it's yours if you're willing to do the work. So start today. Pick your one thing. Execute it. Build from there. And watch what happens when you finally command the room the way you were always capable of. The transformation isn't coming. It's here. It's now. It's in the next conversation you have, the next meeting you lead, the next time you open your mouth and choose your words with intention and power. That's when everything changes. That's when you stop asking for authority and start embodying it. That's when you become the leader whose voice people follow, whose words people remember, whose presence people respect. Not because you demanded it, because you earned it with every sentence you spoke. This is your moment. Take it.